I'll cut that part out. All right, you ready?
Yep.
Oh, let's go. Hey, what's up, America? Welcome to Goodnight America. I'm America's sweetheart, Eric Ryan. Today, very special guest. Endlessly entertained by this man on every other show. So if you're not, I have failed you. Let me tell you about him. Dr. Avrum Weiss. He's an award-winning author, speaker, teacher, and consultant. He's nationally recognized for his pioneering work developing the theory and application of experiential psychotherapy and his groundbreaking work on a comprehensive theory of change in individuals and organizations, which is all great, very impressive. But more importantly, you wrote a book, you've written a few books, but the one we're going to talk about here today is Hidden in Plain Sight. In the first sentence, when you go to the Amazon description of Hidden in Plain Sight, you say that men are pussy whipped. I didn't know therapists could say, you're allowed to say that? I would have gone to therapy a long time ago had I known it was funny.
That's not what I said. I'm pretty sure. I think what I said is pussy whipped. Mm-hmm. Why is it that the worst thing one man can say to another man is that he's afraid of a woman?
Okay, let's get into the phrase pussy whipped just so we have a baseline. So when I used to call, or when I was called pussy whipped in high school, I took it to mean that you're dating a chick and in exchange for having sex with her, you're no longer hanging out with the guys. All right. Exactly. Then in college and after college, it was the same thing. But like, not only you're not hanging out with the guys, but on a football Sunday, you're out apple picking or something. But to me, that's a reasonable exchange. I'm getting sex. You're getting this goofy shit that you like to do. I would suggest that men are even worse off than pussy whipped. I think we are probably, and you can tell me if I'm right or not getting pussy whipped, which is a worse version.
What do you mean? Like not in relationship? Is that what you're saying?
Either not in relationship or in a relationship and not having sex as often as you possibly could or probably should.
Or want to, I think.
Or want these things. Yeah, so.
Because I don't think there's a should or a.
Well, isn't there though? I mean, there's got to be like on the fringes, there's like every hour on the hour and then there's none. Somewhere in there makes sense.
Right, but people have different levels of interest.
Oh, you're telling me.
Right. So, yes, that is what pussy whip means, but then dig down under it a little bit. And I think what men are saying to each other when they call each other pussy whipped is, you're not doing what you want to do. You're doing what she wants you to do. I don't think it means just for sex. I think it's broader than that. I think it means you're no longer your own man. You are controlled by this woman, which is one of the big fears men have of women. You're controlled by this woman and therefore less of a man is what it means.
Yeah, which is fascinating because, listen, we're going to make some gross simplification of complex issues here, but listen, that's what people do. I think to some degree, humans in general, but we're talking about men and women here, we don't really know what we want. We can't articulate. So on the one hand, I think a woman would go, you know what I want is a man who does everything I say and do. It does what I want to do all the time. But then they end up resenting that he caves all the time and isn't a strong presence. But no woman would say, like in a dating app, sometimes I want you to do what I want. And then sometimes I want you to tell me that's stupid and I'm not going to do it. And I'm going to go drink with the guys. But that's really what they want. And listen, we have equally stupid shit going on. But this is just my observation of the opposite species because I'm trying to sleep with them. Does that make any sense?
It makes a lot of sense, and I'm just going to add a dimension to it because I think I have some thoughts about why that is, and as you point out accurately, it's both ways for men and women, and I think it's mostly a conflict between. I think it's hard for people to know what they want because they're socialized to want something that may not be what they want, and so I'm a little older than you. So one of what I think of as a spiritual practice, every morning when I go for a walk, I have a conversation with myself. I literally ask myself what seems like a very simple question, but is not. And I recommend this practice. The question I ask myself first thing in the morning is, what do you want to do today? And it seems like a simple question, but it's not. It usually takes me 30 minutes at least to unpack all of the stuff I think I should do today and actually drill down to, and what I want to do today might be clean out my shop in the garage. That just because it's a task doesn't mean I don't want to do it, but you have to filter through all the crap you're told about what you should be doing. And for men, that usually involves some kind of productivity, some kind of performance. Like men are taught You earn it every day. If you're not producing or protecting or taking care of, you're not a man.
So today, for example, what did you want to do?
I don't think I did it today, unfortunately.
See, even the most healthy among us can't stick to a routine.
Well, no, I mean, everybody has, their off days. I know that what I want, I know one thing I wanted to do is there's been just an administrative thing that's been holding over my head for days and days and days. And I wanted to get that settled, which I did not. I did my best to get it settled, but I want that off my mind.
You got to play. Listen, it's still very early. We're in the same time zone. It's 1:07. You can do this. Let me ask you.
I'm going to add something. I did do the thing I wanted to do most today, which I wanted to look up plans online for bookcases to build some built-in bookshelves, and I did do that.
You know what would have been healthy is if you just lied and said you wanted to kill it on this show. It's fine. It's fine. You wanted bookshelves. That's okay too, I guess.
I was looking forward to it.
How's it going so far?
I'm enjoying you.
It's not bad, right? Okay. Let me ask you this, because this is a trope that exists in the popular zeitgeist, this idea that men don't tell women what they want. They're not effusive with their feelings. I got to tell you, I've been with the same woman for 25 years. I tell her. She doesn't give a shit. So I do think it's this, like everything else, I think it's multifactorial. I think if you have a guy that doesn't tell you his feelings, that's what you want. But we always get used to the temperature of the water that we're in. So eventually, if he just starts dumping all his feelings on you all the time, you're like, shut the fuck up. You know how I know that? Because my wife tells me her feelings. I'm like, oh my God, again. So I think we have this idea that happiness is just this state, but it's not. Happiness goes up and it goes down, and it goes up and it goes down. And we get used to certain things, and then we like things, then we don't anymore. So it's a moving target. And I think, again, I've never been to therapy once. I haven't studied the subject. I think a healthier approach would just be accepting of this fact and then working around it to some degree.
So what's the fact you'd be accepting of?
Just that life isn't going to be thrilling and exciting all the time.
Oh, absolutely.
Sometimes people are going to tell you their feelings and you're into it. Sometimes they're going to tell you your feelings. You're like, I have a job too. I don't want your shit.
Well, this is the Facebook problem, because everybody puts their most interesting, most alluring, sexiest self on Facebook, true or not. And then other people look at that and make the mistake of thinking that's someone's real life. And then they suffer in comparison. They say, well, my life's not as interesting as what they're putting on Facebook. Well, of course, it's not really what their life is like. But we're all putting out memes instead of being real.
Right. And we're chasing a highlight reel, which is not attainable, and it doesn't make any sense, but we know that we're doing that. It's just like humans, I gotta tell you, for a very advanced species, we're pretty fucking stupid because we know certain things to be absolutely true, but because we see them, we believe them. Yeah, it's weird.
It's a great metaphor that you use, highlight reel, because, think about sports. Some people watch the game because they want to see how it builds and how it goes back and forth. And some people just want to watch the highlight reel, which I don't understand that. Like, to me, that is so boring to just watch a highlight reel without the context of how all those plays developed.
Yeah, it's because we're I think we're dopamine addicted. In the highlight that they gets, listen, if everything's a home run or a web gem or a touchdown or a half court shot, and we're like, oh my God, this is unbelievable. But you need those lulls, because the lulls make the highs higher, don't they?
They all go together and they make a whole. It's like people who think that there are many people who the only time in their life that they're happy are the 2 weeks a year they go on vacation, which I think is terribly sad. I mean, I'm glad they're having a nice vacation, but I would say life is what happens the other 50 weeks of the year.
Unless you're European, in which case you vacation for 50 weeks a year and you work for 2, which I think is probably a little bit healthy. I guess it depends on the culture. All right, the sports analogy, let's just stay here for a second because I find this very interesting. So I listened to one of your appearances on something, and you said something to the effect of you put out your wife's teacup or something. You do something for her tea-wise. Is that right? And it's a little thing, but it proves that you're thinking about her. All right. So this, again, in the popular trope out in the zeitgeist, is this idea that if you would just do this thing, like women, you just cook dinner once, blah, 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 blah. Because listen, I do all the grocery shopping. I do all the cooking. I do 95% of the cleanup because she eats so goddamn slow. I just can't have the kitchen messy at the end. But she's used to that. And this is how I know. And that's fine. This is my point about accepting. Let me show you this. This is Tom Brady. The man went to 10 Super Bowls. I'm a rabid Patriots fan, but I'll tell you this. I got used to him. I got used to 14-2. 14-2 didn't blow my mind. Another Super Bowl appearance. I love football potentially more than anything else. Bourbon and my kids, they're they make up the top 3. And I got used to the thing I love the most at the highest form of entertainment and winning and feeling superior to everybody else because I'm a fan of the Patriots, everything I love. And I still got used to it. This is a problem, unless you just accept that we're horribly fucked up. But back to relationships. I don't think there's a thing. I don't think you can talk about your feelings and fix everything. I don't think you can do the little things or the big things and fix it. I just think we're two animals trying to work things out. And it's just inherently hard.
Well, but we're animals with frontal lobes. We're not just animals like my dog's an animal. And by the way, I'm a Falcons fan, so we have an issue here.
Oh, what happened with the Falcons? You guys were winning so much. Oh, my God.
The team hasn't been the same since.
Well, neither is ours, although we did win one more after that. But yes, listen, we both suck now, so here we are.
So your analogy, again, is a good one. So it's not only that I make a real effort to do nice things for other people. And it's not just my wife. Friend of mine's husband has been very sick and been in the hospital. I've called her, several times. I mean, I make a point of trying to do things like that because it feels good to me when people are considerate of me. But the other side of it is that I make a point to be appreciative. So another thing I've learned to do later in life is if I'm thinking of you a week from now, and I'm thinking, I had a really good time with Eric, I will send you an email in that moment expressing my appreciation for the good time. So whenever I have the thought of appreciating something that someone's done, I try to act on it. So I also do most of the cooking. But when my wife makes a meal, she has never made a meal I haven't thanked her for, which I could just who cares? She made a meal. It's no big deal. But then take me any effort to say a genuine appreciation, to say thank you. And that's what happens in marriages is we start off paying a lot of attention, and then we kind of get used to stuff and we stop. The things we're talking about have so much to do with whether a marriage is working well or not. And you think they're just little things, but they're not. When you stop doing that stuff, it's like not putting oil in your engine. You can get away with it for a while, but eventually you're going to hear a grinding that's a very expensive noise. Mm-hmm. And that's what happens in a relationship.
Yeah, it's preventative maintenance.
Absolutely.
You said, okay, a couple of things. One, if I don't get an email from you next week, I'm probably going to end up in therapy. So this is sort of a double dipping in your case. Because I'm sure you like to support your
like a punishment.
No. The other thing, so that's
my goal for this interview is to convince you that therapy is a good thing.
Oh, no, I'm perfect. Which probably means I need therapy.
As my mother would say, the only perfect people are 6 feet underground. So my condolences.
No, I'm close. Believe me, how much I drink. You said, like I said, you endlessly entertain me. You said on one of the other appearances, you said you've learned a lot about people watching your dog in obedience class because they're not stingy with the treats. And that's such. You said even when the dog does something remotely close to what you want it to do, you should give it a treat.
The learning term is reinforcing successive approximations. So again, let's put it in relationships. The mistake people make is they say, I want my wife to be more careful with her spending, right? Yeah. So they don't ever, then they're waiting for her to get to here. And they don't, whereas if you want to get a dog to sit, you give it a treat when it looks at you. You give it a treat when anything that's in the direction of sitting, you reinforce, because otherwise you're waiting around for it to randomly sit. So you reinforce every step along the way.
This is fascinating. I don't have this written down, but you just made me think about something, which is this stupid concept about adults getting mad when children are given participation trophies for two reasons. One, is that dumb, like this soft generation is getting participation trophies. You morons, you are giving them the trophies. They didn't conceptualize wanting a trophy and then you placated their needs. You go, hey, let's give them a trophy. Oh, look at that fucking idiot with the trophy. It's so stupid. It's like baking a horrible cake and going, who the fuck baked this shitty cake? We are doing it, okay? But also, it seems to me like a participation trophy in the treat analogy isn't the worst thing in the world, because you're telling it, like, man, you're out there, you tried. There's a lot of kids sitting on their ass playing Fortnite. At least you're out here kicking a ball around. So is there any through line there between just when you do even marginally good stuff to get something out of it so you feel good about your marginal shit?
I'm with you. I think you left a piece out. I don't think the problem is the participation trophy. I think the problem is we got scared to not give a trophy for first place.
Yeah, which is also stupid.
I think I don't think it has to be either or. I think you can give trophies for all kinds of stuff, recognized. So for example, you've been mentioning sports. You say you're a sports fan. People are really sports fans, know how to watch a game and watch the players who make things happen, who are not necessarily the Tom Brady's. See that? Right. I took an opportunity to take a shot at Brady there. You like that?
Yeah. I don't like it, but yeah.
But it's, maybe it's the left guard, or somebody who is doing things that you have to be a little bit more knowledgeable about the sport to appreciate. And Brady can't do what he does without those guys, which is why quarterbacks buy linemen, Rolexes and stuff like that, because they know they get killed without them.
Exactly. So, Richard Seymour is a classic example of a guy that was through the dynasty years, won 3 rings, doesn't have the stats to be a Hall of Famer, but is a Hall of Famer because they played Ducap and you had to double team him every time. So that's,
So we got, in addition, so I think it was a well-intentioned to want to give kids recognition for every step along the way. Like in school, you get a thing for being there every day, which it matters. It's a good habit to learn in life, showing up. But then we got afraid to also recognize excellence, which is important because we want our kids striving to be the best they can be.
Yeah. Speaking of stupid parents, so now my son is 8, so he plays soccer and basketball, and they don't keep score. But dum-dums, these kids know how to fucking count. So, it's not like they go, oh, I don't know who won. I have no idea. We're just out there having a good time. It's as if we've convinced ourselves that if we don't tell them the score at the end, they're 8 years old. If they can't count, we got bigger problems than who won or who lost the soccer game.
I played basketball my whole life, and not now. So up until a point, I played basketball. And I rarely knew the score of the game, but I damn well knew how many points you scored off me.
Of course, because we're humans. All right, let's talk about men for a few minutes here, because you're men focused. You do men groups. Is this right? Is this okay? But that's a little interesting because men, well, if we're gross general organizations, men don't go to therapy. It's more of a woman thing. Is that
correct? Used to be, not so much anymore.
Oh, so what demographic of men is going to see a therapist?
All ages. I have a practice full of guys who never in their lives, like you, never thought they would ever go to therapy, and now they're completely devoted and get a ton out of it and are very committed to it. So I think men are learning there's 2 parts to this equation. So I'll give you the part I know you're going to like best. I've been doing workshops around the country for therapists, criticizing them for the work they do with men and pointing out that there are many anti-male biases embedded in their work that they are unaware of. So one of my sort of things I'm passionate about is I say to therapists, like, look, if you were going to start working with combat veterans, what's the first thing you'd do? They say, well, I go get training. Okay, great. If you were going to work with that, and they always answer, I say, okay, now you want to work with men. And none of them say, go get training. They just think they're ready and prepared. I'm like, no, you need training to work with men because all the models that you were trained in are based on work with women, and men are different.
Oh. That's very interesting. I have a guest coming up who is a female surgeon who has written a book about the male biases in medicine. And I guess it's reversed in therapy.
Well, it has become, because in my field, it's overwhelmingly, like I supervise for an agency, and there are like more than 15 people in the group that I do with them, and there's not one man in the group.
Wow. So you have said in other appearances that the dynamic with a group of men is wildly different than if you had thrown a token chick into the
Yes.
equation. Why do you think that is?
I think because men are afraid of women. I think because, and this was a total shock to me. I had no idea this was true. But when I did my first therapy group for men, I literally stood outside the door the first night and I thought, this is the worst idea I've ever had in my life. This is going to be so boring. They're going to talk about sports. They're going to talk about work. They're going to talk about money, but they're not going to talk about themselves. And 180 degrees wrong. I'm happy to admit I had never been more wrong. The groups I do for men, the men are more emotionally open in those groups than the groups I do with men and women. These guys look each other in the eye, talk about loving each other, talking about how important they are to each other, and are very open with how they feel. And what I learned is that men want to do that the same way women do, but there's all this socialization that gets in the way.
All right. I do want to talk about this epidemic of male loneliness, but do you think, is it part and parcel in the sense that these men getting these groups and it's like releasing a hose that had been kinked, that they don't have a group of friends, and then now it's the opportunity and it's a safe space and there's no chicks around?
Well, they have friends. So I always ask men, do you have friends? And they always say yes. But then it's the follow-up question that is interesting. Then I say, no, by friends, I mean people you talk to the way you're talking to me. And then they're like, no, of course not. And very few women would say that. Very few women would say, I don't have somebody I can talk to. And we know that loneliness is a bigger risk for early mortality than smoking cigarettes. If you had to choose for your health between having no friends or smoking cigarettes, you'd live longer smoking cigarettes. This is the truth. You can't make this shit up. So it's deadly. And that article you're referring to that you read has been read 1 million times. So it kind of touched a nerve.
Yeah. Is it? Okay. So the guys that have friends, when they're hanging out, they're talking about sports or politics or work, and they're just, is that, so women live longer and they tend to have more friends, but I think women would, again, gross generalization, they'll talk about feelings and anxieties and, kind of realer shit. And that is helping them as well, I would assume. The guys talking about surface level bullshit.
Yes. And I think the sad part is that the men also want to be having more personal conversations. But every man I've ever talked to says to me, well, I want to, but no other men do. So they don't know how to, it's like with gay men back in the 50s and 60s, it was dangerous. You had to kind of figure out who else was gay, right? And you didn't want to get that wrong because you could get the shit kicked out of you. So they had to figure out, like, how do I find somebody else who's like me without getting hurt? And that's how I think men are today, is how do I figure out, if I say to this guy, I really been, if I have this friend, this new friend, and I say to him, we're having a drink, and he says, how you doing? And I say, not well. I'm really having a hard time. How's that going to go? Is he going to be glad that I've said something more personal and, meet me? Or is he going to look at me like, you wimp?
Yeah. No, if you told me that, I'd probably call you gay. I'm just kidding. But yeah, I mean, that's the fear, is that you open up emotionally and then you get made fun of. Right.
Because in this culture, masculinity is not a given. Women are taught that they are a woman no matter what they do. Men are taught that to be a man means to not be feminine. And so if you do anything that seems feminine to anybody, you are less of a man. So men spend our lives guarding against saying or doing anything that might sound feminine to someone.
Yeah, I was, well, first of all, my hair, right? So anytime anyone does anything, it's a little flamboyant. I don't know if you've noticed, that comes across as gay. But then when I start talking, they go, well, that would be a very odd combination to talk like this. And you know what I mean? So but I was a vegetarian for 5 years, and it was mostly like, whoa, are you gay? Like because I think it's tied into the idea that men used to hunt, but now ordering the wings at Hooters doesn't make you masculine. You just said, can I have the chicken that somebody else killed and prepared for me? And but there's like this inherent masculinity wrapped up with eating meat and, having, not taking care of yourself physically. It's strange. Like this, again, We have this neocortex, but we use it like a bunch of morons.
And it leads to us living 7 years less than women, largely because we think it's not masculine to take care of ourselves and we don't go to the doctor.
And okay, let's talk about this for a second, because I think men seem to, although I still think we're the dominant, annoying thing, we feel like there's an attack on masculinity and that we have to hide certain aspects of ourselves because it's not in vogue. As a father of an 8-year-old son, because everybody's, oh, you can't let boys be boys. His birthday party, it was like Lord of the Flies. They all have their shirts off and hitting each other with sticks and shit. And they're dirty. I was like, okay, so at this age, they're still being what I have in my head and sort of what I lived and experienced as a young boy. This is kind of like the same shit. So, and my father's in the military. I lived on military bases, which I think is probably a little like more masculine than the average neighborhood. When does this thing happen with boys where they feel like they can't be boys, and who does it to them?
4 months old.
Jesus Christ.
4 months. Isn't that awful? Let me tell you a heartbreaking story, which answers your question. There's a very interesting woman whose name is Judy Chu. She's a psychologist and she's a congresswoman from California. So she's a busy person. So she spent 3 years in a preschool studying boys. She just spent 3 years hanging out with this group of 5 and 6-year-old boys just to see what they're like and what makes them tick. So she told this story in her book. That book is When Boys Become Boys. The kids at the end of the year, the teacher said every kid gets to lead the class in their favorite song from the year. So this sweet little boy stands up in front of the class and he starts singing Brahms' Lullaby, or a lullaby.
Yep.
So what do you think the other boys did?
I don't think they probably took to it too kindly.
I think they mocked and humiliated him, which he picked up immediately and said, I was just kidding. Here's my favorite song. And then he sings the Marine Corps anthem.
Oh, Jesus.
So this is a 5-year-old boy who has already figured out that if he lets anything soft or tender or vulnerable show, other boys will humiliate him, and that the safest thing to do is to put on a hyper masculine cover. 5 years old.
That's outrageous. You know, from a personal point of view, I've always been more intrigued, not by the sort of single note masculinity of the army, and maybe that's because that's in the environment I grew up in. It was sort of boring. But Prince, for example, Prince was 4 feet tall, wore mascara, heels, and crushed velvet, and he would slay. He would sleep with your wife in front of you. That's a little interesting to me. He's being flamboyant. He's obviously very masculine, but he's textured and layered, and he plays music, and he's a Renaissance man. That to me is interesting. But I don't think the average woman would go, you know what I want? Little Prince, little David Bowie. I think chicks also, I think in some cases, like the ultra masculine male. Maybe that's baked in, or society's telling them that's what they like. I don't know. What are girls like? Women.
Well, they're as confused as we are.
Okay, good. Thank God.
So
if it had a simple answer, I was going to be scared.
So if it seems to you you're getting mixed messages, the answer is you are. So just look at what's happening in the culture. So in the culture, in the media, all you see is information about women wanting men to be vulnerable and open, and all that's true. But at the same time, go to the grocery store and pick up one of the books in the end cap near the counter.
Yeah.
And you know what the genre that publishers call those books?
Is it romantasy?
Bodice rippers. Okay. So what happens in these books? The plot is always the same. She says, no. Okay. Yeah. The books are all the same. So it's exciting to women so their head's telling them, I want an emotionally connected, vulnerable, and then something else is telling them, I want to be taken. I want to be won over. So they have the same kind of internal conflict. They have different ones than us, but it is confusing because it's confusing.
It's absolutely wild. I think David Tell, the comedian, has this line. He's like, women tell you they want something that's funny, but also outdoorsy. And it's like, you want a circus clown. That's what you're into. But these romantasy books.
It's not different. It's no different than men. I mean, we have the whole Madonna whore thing going on. We want our partners to be the Madonna, and we want them to be whores. We have the same kind of conflicts in us.
But okay, I totally agree. And I think it's interesting, but I don't think that it's non-achievable. If I said to my wife, listen, let's be very reasonable parents who are both gainfully employed, and doting and loving to our children, and we pay our bills on time. And then 1 week in a month, let's do some wild shit. I don't think that's totally unattainable, but
Not at all. But so let's go back to your son's birthday party. So I don't have any problem with the kids being Tarzan and running all around and testosterone explosion. I don't think it's a problem. I think it's a problem if it only becomes a problem if when he wants to explore a different part of himself, he gets shamed. Yeah. So maybe the next day he wants to lie on the couch and watch cartoons and suck his thumb with a blankie.
Right.
That should be okay too.
I've said this on every episode of the show so far, and I think it's going to be my thing. I think that the core problem with humans is that we're binary and absolutists. Mm-hmm. So you have to fit in with this ridiculous bullshit, even though we know it doesn't make any sense.
Well, that is very true for men. Men are clearly given that message. And there's a colleague of mine, the guy who wrote the foreword to the book, who studies what he calls gender role conflict, which is the difference between who you are and who you think you're supposed to be as a man, that gap, right? The higher your gender role conflict, the less you are like the person you think you should be, is correlated with heart disease, depression, anxiety, suicide, all kinds of, dozens and dozens of poor outcomes, all from the pressure to be something you're not.
This has nothing to do with anything, and it just occurred to me. In terms of men, okay, in the world right now, you can say a lot. You can't say on the dating apps, for example, you could never. You would be shunned if you said something like, "I would never date an Asian chick," or "I would never date a black man," or like these. And objectively, we should look down on people that would say shit like this. But you know what women can say, and everybody's like, "Bravo! I can't date a short man." Like short men are universally, if you go, you can say, listen, I haven't been on a dating app. I've been with the same woman for 25 years. I had to call her house and ask if she was there. But from what I understand on apps, there's like a height thing. And you say, I would never date a dude under 5'8". And everyone's like, yeah, absolutely. That makes all the sense in the world. Nobody likes short guys. And I'm not saying, listen, I'm about 6'1", so it's not I don't have a personal axe to grind. I'm just saying that's got to be just the way that you have to perform in the world and the way that other people are looking at you. That's tough.
Absolutely. And the other one that's like that, you're absolutely right. The other one that's like that is weight.
Yeah.
You can be, I've worked with patients who are morbidly obese, and they tell me that total strangers walk up to them on the street and say the most vile, awful stuff to them. They don't know them. And they just feel completely free to walk up and say these horrible things you wouldn't say to your worst enemy. So it's the same way about weight.
All right. I want to, the male loneliness thing too is interesting to me for a lot of reasons, because I'm a male and I'm not lonely, but I sort of went out of my way to not be. For example, we moved to this town 3 years ago, and I sort of talked to my wife. I was like, we got to get involved with the community. We have 2 kids. It's a neighborhood. We're going to be generally happier if we have college friends and shit like that. But so my kid plays soccer, so I made a concerted effort to talk to the fathers. I happen to play bar trivia in the area with another group of friends of mine. So like I've invited people out to play bar trivia. We did the Hot Ones challenge together. That was amazing. You got a whole bunch of dudes eating hot wings, and then I had questions about their favorite bands, favorite music, albums. The best year of their life, not counting your stupid wedding and the year your kid was born, because let's not do that. But that opens shit up. And listen, it's a pain in the ass because people are going to drop out. You could get rejected when someone says, nah, I don't like bar trivia. I don't like hot wings. So you do have to put yourself out there. And I wonder if these people that are lonely and have no friends, it's tough putting yourself out there with a woman. And I think if you're looking for friendship, it's also difficult putting yourself out there with a dude.
Absolutely. And I think that part of the equation we don't pay as much attention to. So in the book, one of the chapters I am most happy with is there's a chapter for men in that situation. And there's sort of a step-by-step, here's how you could meet. Basically what I suggest is start a book group and use this book as the first book in the book group. Once you get a group of guys talking about this book, they will be more open with each other because everything in the book is so personal. So even, people are not threatened by a book group. That's not an unmasculine thing to do. I'm in a book group. And that's a sort of like an icebreaker, a way of connecting with other men and then having the kind of conversations you want to have.
Yeah. I think modern life is tough too, because I think modern parenting requires way more time and effort than certainly mine and probably your parents too.
Oh yeah.
When I played soccer growing up too, but I rode my bike to the soccer thing. My parents didn't provide a taxi service for me. So then if you look at the limited amount of time we have to hang out with our friends, and then when we do, you're asking, not you, but the royal you, to break through that surface level and to get to something deeper. Like, when the fuck are we supposed to schedule this? When is this supposed? I'm playing bar trivia tonight, as a matter of fact. Fucking thrilled. I don't want to talk about problems. I want to get drunk and be happy. So I think that's part of it too.
Do you know how many times in this short period of time we've been talking, you've mentioned you're drinking?
No, I haven't. Why? What are you insinuating? I have a problem?
No, I'm just pointing out to you how many times you mentioned you're drinking.
No, I know. I sort of do it for shtick, but I will say,
you said directly 10 minutes ago, I drink too much.
I know, but it's shticky. I also call myself America's sweetheart. My problem is that I like to muddy the waters, so nobody ever really knows who I am. I think part of that is I'm a military brat.
For you?
What's that?
How's that working for you?
It's one of those things where I ask for it and then I'm annoyed when I get it.
Sure, because it leaves you not known by anybody. I was talking with a guy last week who I have known. He's been in therapy with me, but he's kept it. He comes in and out. He doesn't stay very long. He's kept it. He brings stuff to talk about it, but it's very concrete problem solving. And he came back and we had a session, and I just said one thing to him that was more personal. It was sort of underneath the content, and he just started sobbing. And what I said to him was about, something to the effect of, I don't think anybody ever sees you. And he just started sobbing. And I think that is true of so many men. And it's what you're saying of yourself, that you keep yourself moving, like Ali, right? You're like, float like a butterfly so nobody can hit you, but nobody can touch you either.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think, I sort of do it somewhat deliberately. I'm aware of it, and it's probably unhealthy to some degree, but I think a lot of people do, and they're not aware. And it, I thought about this when I was listening and reading some of your stuff too, just in terms of compliments, back to the dog treat thing. If you watch when women see each other, like, oh my God, where'd you get that dress? Those shoes, what, fucking Amazon, you know what I mean? Like, there's automatically, oh, you look so good, or whatever. Guys do that. As a matter of fact, the extreme end is insulting the other person, but I do give some credence to the idea that the highest form of acceptance is making fun of the other person in a happy sort of shit talky way.
Mm-hmm. So it's a great topic you're bringing up. So people who have researched couples have looked at the ratio of saying something shitty to your partner versus saying something nice, right?
Yeah.
So for each shitty thing that you say to someone you care about, how many nice things do you think you have to say to equal one shitty thing? And I'll give you a hint. It ain't one. It ain't 1 to 1. So guess, how many nice things does it take to outweigh one shitty thing?
Oh God, I don't know. What is it?
7.
Oh man, that's a lot.
So think about it. Even if you're 1 to 1, which most people aren't, most people say more shitty things than nice things. Even if you're doing better than average, you're 1 to 1, you're 1/7 where you need to be.
Yeah. Well, I think men and women also communicate differently. When I did the hot ones thing, it was a mix of my older friends and my new neighborhood friends. And as soon as you start talking about approachable subjects, but what also has meaning. So favorite album, I think, inevitably will come from the years between like 12 and 18. And these are in music really hits you in a certain way there. So asking what the favorite album is inevitably talks about what you were doing that year and how you were feeling. And that's a perfect gateway drug. That's weed to heroin for getting into a guy's psyche.
I agree.
And the same
a lot of questions like that.
Yeah. And so I guess my point is, when you're trying to have deeper connections with males, it doesn't always have to be, tell me about your feelings, Steve. You could start, there's other ways to do it.
I think what you and I are doing right now is an example.
Right. Yeah. We have our own little book club, although you wrote this book.
Well, but it doesn't matter. But we're all over the map, but we're getting to know each other, and being more open and real with each other.
I better get an email next week. By the way, listen, you can't open me up like this and then let me down. You I don't know if you've worked on if this book is done, but I did hear in another interview with you. How did you phrase it? Tell me what you learned about men from your mother.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not working on that project anymore. I'll tell you what that was, and then I'll tell you what I am working on. So the number one thing I hear from men in talking about their relationships, the thing that almost every man has ever said to me is, I feel criticized.
Mm.
That is like almost a constant state for men. So I started getting curious, like, well, are women being critical, or are they just hypersensitive? So then I started asking women, what did you learn from your mother about men? And what I learned is all the stuff that men feel criticized about is what women learned from their mothers, that mothers teach their daughters highly critical things about men, like don't trust them, make sure you have your own money, don't expect to be close with them. And so women then struggle with, they love you, but they have all this stuff in their head that they've learned from their mother and the culture that's very critical of men. And so that criticism is in the air in most marriages, but you can't see it, touch it, or taste it. So it just sort of hangs there and you don't know what it is, but you can feel the effects of it.
There are certain things in life that I love more than anything else. This has nothing to do with drinking. It's when I think something and then an expert tells me that I'm right. And this is one of those things, because I brought this up to my wife many times, many times, because I can see, you know, we've been together for so long and you really know other people's families when you've been married for 25 years. And I go, this is a direct correlation between what you grew up with, because I'm a stand-in for an avatar of what a guy should be in your childhood mind.
Exactly.
And no matter how many times I say it, and listen, she's not stupid. She's got as a matter of fact, she's got a psychology degree, but it's like, you can't crack that logically.
The sad thing is, to me, women who got this in their ear when they're growing up don't want it in their ear. You know, they want to see you for who you are, and they may not even. So the whole purpose of doing this was to help women recognize some of the critical stuff they've got going on about men.
Man, when you get hardwired as a kid, it's really hard to unwire those wires, isn't it?
It is, and that's why Freud thought that therapy should be just for children. He said, you're really wasting your time with adults. They're kind of already cooked. What we need to do is figure out how to help kids.
Huh. Do you think that kids would take to it? Do you think that they're malleable enough that speaking to an adult about problems they don't really can articulate?
Well,
you think?
Yes, but you don't speak with them. You play with them. They're not really verbal at that age. And so you just live it out through forms of play. And I have this theory that I think, because I was a pretty serious basketball player most of my life, I think if you play an hour of basketball with me, I can tell you as much about you as if I did a complete psychological evaluation. I can tell you everything about you that I want to know from an hour on the basketball court. So we're ourselves wherever we are. So whether we're talking or playing basketball or playing a game, whatever, it's you're showing you.
Yeah. That's very interesting. What you would be able to tell about me is that I never played basketball. Let me tell you what the problem was. I grew up in the Jordan era. In military school is a very mixed race. So I always had a lot of black kids in my class, black friends, and basketball being at its height with a lot of black friends. I was like, I'm very Irish. Just, it's not, listen, I know you're Jewish. That is not, they're probably on the same wavelength in terms of like NBA aspirations, but yeah. Okay. So let's talk about marriage for a second.
Marriage? What about it?
Well, I just find it, so I don't think
I'm in favor.
I'm sure you are. I think it's one of those things like capitalism, which is it's the best of the shitty economic forces. Let's say, so I know it's not quite 50%, it's less than that, but how many marriages end in divorce? It's in the
more than 50%.
Oh, it's more than 50%. Okay. Yeah. So my thing has always been, it seems like an awful gamble, because if more than 50% of marriages end in divorce, of the remaining, call it 45, who's happy? And who's like legitimately happy, as opposed to just staying together for the kids or staying together for convenience and all that. So it just seems statistically bad idea.
Well, it is under the current circumstances. So the two hardest jobs I know in the world, in order, the most difficult job I know in the world is being a parent. And the second most difficult job I know is being a partner, being a romantic partner to someone. So When you had kids, did you have that class in parenting that we're supposed to give you when you had kids?
No,
Oh, no, you missed that, huh?
I think I
When
missed
you
it.
got
Yeah.
married, did you get that training and how to be well, you missed that.
No.
So how is it that we think? So if you want to drive a car, you have to take a class.
Yeah.
Right? If you want to own a gun, you have to take a gun safety course, I hope. But somehow we think that anybody can be in an intimate relationship without any help or support. And you know, that's crazy. To me, the harder a job is, the more help I want with it. So if I'm going to do something in my shop that I don't know how to do, I'm going to ask somebody who knows how to do it. I'm going to ask somebody to come over and show me how to do it. I'm not going to just push my way through it and try to figure it out. I'm going to get help.
Yeah.
And so I think it's not a good idea, only because we don't help people. We don't give them any support and guidance about how to do it. And so people have the wackiest ideas about what makes a marriage work, and they don't talk to anybody about it. So I watch long-term married couples all the time. Every time I'm with a couple who's been married 40, 50, 60 years, I watch them like a hawk, and I want to see what they're doing that's working. I study success.
Okay, yeah, I want to talk about that too. That was about therapy. All right, but back to the marriage thing real quick. I think what's conceptually interesting is, for a long time, humans sort of lived in close-knit groups with neighbors and bigger families.
Yes.
And then you had more examples of marriages within your own family and neighborhood marriages, and maybe how things could work. And then Kurt Vonnegut would often talk about the shame of the death of, having large extended families around, having cousins and aunts and uncles and grandmothers and grandfathers close. And his point was, now we ask so much of our partners, and the core of that is that we ask our partners to not only provide excitement, but also comfort. And these are diametrically opposed, obviously. And I do think it's combine that with all the outside factors and modern parenting. It's almost a miracle that anybody stays married.
Yeah, you're so spot on. You're so on it. It's not only that we used to live that way, we are built to live that way, which is why loneliness creates more early mortality than smoking cigarettes, because it's not connection with other people is not gravy. It's not an extra. It's the core and the fundamental need that every human being have. And we don't do a good job at that anymore at all. So it's really just in one generation that we've lost that. So you referenced, riding your bike to soccer. So I grew up, two friends in my neighborhood. My childhood, I can barely remember what the inside of my house looks like. I remember my yard and my friends' yards, and where we played football, and where we played basketball, and where we played. That's where my life was, with my two friends. Right? Now kids don't see other kids except in structured, supervised settings. They have very little spontaneous, but I spent my whole life outside playing. Everything else was a blur.
I'm trying hard to recreate that. And, we live in a neighborhood with kids, and after school, the kid that lives over here comes over, or my kid goes over there, and I'm like, I want to shake him, go, do you know how fucking lucky you are? You remember this shit? Now it annoys me because every time they come over, they break shit and everything's dirty. I'm like, all right, this is what kids do. And now
just set up a room where you don't care where that happens. Send them outside.
Well, that's the other thing too. My parents would be like, get the fuck outside. They want to be outside. They just, at night, they just want to be back at some point. But yes, like the go outside thing was that my entire life, and now it really doesn't exist. Strange. But
and
again,
it's much worse for men. It's much worse for men who have acquaintances, but most often not friends in the sense of someone they can talk to about what's on their mind. And so then, as you say, men put that weight on their marriages, which is fine, obviously, to talk with your spouse about something that's bothering you, but it can't be the only person you talk to.
Yeah, that's just one of those complicated things, because back to the pussy whip thing, all through, high school and college and stuff, once you've got a girlfriend, you want to spend a lot of time with them. I'm guessing some of it had to do with the sex. And then eventually, though, I think the girl wants you around too, because it's exciting and new. But it's also conceptually bizarre. At some point, you almost need to leave the nest. Like, all right, go back to your friends now. You need to go, congregate with your own species, and so do I. But I just think it's one of those natural things that we have to accept as humans. We're going to spend a lot of time together. We're recording each other. We fucking love the shit out of each other and everything's great. Then we need to go back to normal life and having relationships with other people. Right?
And the couples you and I are talking about who have been together happily married for decades have figured that out. They're not on top of each other. That's why there was so much divorce during COVID.
Too much of each other.
People had worked out. So my in-laws, he was an airline pilot and he worked the long distance route. So he was gone 3 or 4 days of every week.
Yeah.
When he retired, their marriage was hard. They were like, I'm fine with you 3 or 4 days a week. I'm not loving the 7 days a week thing. I mean, who is there in your life you want to be with every hour of every day?
Yes. It's one of those things too. The extremes don't work. If you're around too much, it could hurt yourself. If you're not around, you're Tyreek Hill and you're having 11 kids and he's married. That's also not good. So there's a healthy balance of, sometimes you're around, sometimes you're not. I need to miss you. Don't you need to miss me a little bit? The therapy thing, the therapy space, very interesting because again, you said somewhere in one of the appearances, I think you were talking about Freud, and you were like, "Oh, he studied and worked with the worst of the worst." Now, is there also a benefit, and I think you mentioned it, that you do it, working with the best of the best, seeing how super healthy couples work together, and be like, "Let's do that. That's a recipe. Let's follow that recipe," as opposed to just always talking about the shitty couples.
It's what I do as a therapist all the time. Almost every time when somebody brings something to me and says, "Here, this is broken, fix it," my first question is almost always, "What did you do that helped before?" Because why would I start from scratch and trying to make something up when you've already figured out some stuff that works and doesn't work? Let's start there.
I think that makes all the sense in the world. Here's the thing too. In therapy, because I've never been, I'm just curious. It appears on the outside looking in, every time therapy is portrayed in movies or TV, it seems pretty humorless. Is it ever funny? Is therapy ever fun? Does somebody ever tell you something and you're allowed to try to make them laugh?
Just spend an hour with me. What do you think?
Yeah, but is this a session? You're going to bill me, aren't you? Oh, geez.
I'm not. This is not a session, but I'm not being any different with you than I am in my office.
Okay, so it is it's more lighthearted because listen, I have a guy that has an AA app. And I asked him, I was like, "I've never been to an AA meeting either. Is it as serious as movies?" And he goes, "No, absolutely not."
Right.
And I think from the outside looking in, if you just have the Hollywood view of something, it's never even close.
I get it, because when I was in training, I worked with my mentor on a book. And part of the book was I listened to hundreds of hours of him doing therapy. Mm-hmm. And I was shocked because the two of them are laughing their asses off frequently. And I thought, "Oh, that's wrong. You're not allowed to." But he was like, "Oh my God, of course that's fine." Therapy is for an open expression of whatever you're experiencing. So sometimes people cry, sometimes people get angry, and sometimes people laugh. That's the whole idea, is to be free to feel however you feel.
So I had a friend recently who went through a super traumatic event and sent her and her children to therapy, and anybody would go after something like this happened. But it's been about a year, and she was like, "I'm not sure I need to go anymore because it always brings it back to the surface. I feel like I know you're not Catholic, but in Catholicism, I grew up, I'm very agnostic now, but confession, for example, we had to go in front of the priest and, tell him our sins. I'm like, I'm fucking 10. I don't know. What are my sins? You feel like you're making stuff up. And then she was like, "I feel like every week I have to come up with new material for the therapist because not only that, but also it always brings the super traumatic event back up to the surface, and she'd rather just let it scar over." Are there absolutes in this thing, or do some people benefit from talking about a lot, or what is that?
There are no absolutes, but what she's talking about may be a good indication that she's ready to either go less often or stop going. Because when people start therapy, they can't wait till the next session. They're so upset, they're so bothered, their life is such a mess that they can't wait. And then it's not so urgent because things get better. That's the thing about therapy. It actually works, in case you didn't know that.
Not questioning.
And we have lots of research that proves that it works. Not only that it works, but that it's cost effective. For every dollar you spend on therapy, you save like $3 or $4 on healthcare. Oh. So then as it starts working, and there's less of a sense of urgency, and that's a good sign. So when people start saying, "Oh, I don't really have anything to talk about," then it's working.
And then it's a logical end if they're saying that you cured them. in so much that you can cure anybody. One more thing.
You're through this hard place in your life, and you've learned some skills from our work that will hopefully help you in the next hard place in life you come to, because there will be one.
Life is tough. Somebody should fix that. You say men often say, so I think men, a common love language, again, if we're going to overgeneralize, is acts of service, right?
Absolutely.
And I think from a man's point of view, he does acts of service and the woman still seems unsatisfied, even if she's giving him a specific list to get done. A common argument from men to women is that the goalpost moves all the time.
Yes.
That is something that I think, well, I get it. I've been there. What is the goalpost moving phenomenon? And are we just reading it incorrectly?
That's easy. It's because men are being concrete and not reading between the lines.
Oh, they are hard to read, the lines.
Well,
between lines.
I don't know. It doesn't seem hard to me, but maybe it is hard for you. I think it isn't as hard for you as you think it is. I think if I was sitting and watching you and your wife have a conversation, and I freeze framed and I said, "What do you think she's really asking for, Eric?" I think you know. I don't think you can't read between the lines. I think you know. I think you just go with she says, "Would you please clean up the garage? It's such a fucking mess. It just bothers me." Then you go clean the garage. But I think you know there's something else going on there. It's just easier to clean the garage.
It's easier to act dumb. Is that what you're saying?
I hadn't thought of it that way, but yeah.
Yeah. I think, okay. Let me know if I'm onto something here. Opposites attract, I've heard, because what we want as humans is to make biologically balanced children to some degree.
Yeah.
Now, that made all the sense in the world when we died at 25 because we were run over by a woolly mammoth. Now we're living with the opposite of ourselves until we're 83. And that seems a little tough.
It doesn't have to do, I'm with you until the end. I don't think it has to do, I like your premise, but I have a different understanding of why.
Okay.
I think it has to do with the degree of tolerance for parts of yourself. So an old truism is the things that bother us most about other people are things that bother us about ourselves. And so in a marriage, you have two ways to go. One is you can just be irritated with your spouse all the time, which is not very helpful. Or you can sort of get curious about, why am I so intolerant? Why do I care if he cleans the garage or not? Why am I this agitated? I think I want something else from him, and I'm asking him to clean the garage, but that's not really what I want.
They're so complicated, the women, unlike us simple men. All right, we're coming up on the hour, but I did want to ask you this. I don't think this violates any code of ethics or anything. You do a lot of men's groups. You talk to a lot of men. Can you give me like the top 3 to 5 problems at a macro level? What you hear the most? What are men complaining about or working through?
So we got to do a clarification here. Are you talking about the problems that they come in talking about, or the problems that they get down to that are really the underlying problems?
No, that's interesting. Can you do both?
Those are very different. I can do both.
Can we smush them together somehow? Yeah, I want to hear them both because it's a complete answer that way.
That's a good idea. So coming in with, sometimes they don't come in on their own. Sometimes they come in because their partner has said, either you go to therapy or else, or something's blown up in their lives, and so usually they will come in talking about dissatisfactions in their marriage, feeling criticized, goalpost moving, can't please her. That's a big one. Yeah. Feeling not like they haven't achieved what they wanted to in their lives. They're not the successful, not just financially, but in all kinds of different ways. Those are probably the two on the surface that people come in talking about. And then what we inevitably get to are the stuff that you and I have been talking about, which is not having a very developed inner life, not feeling very happy, not feeling close to other people. One of the smart ass questions I ask men is, what color are your children's eyes? And sadly, is how often they don't know.
Oh my God, that's heartbreaking.
Well,
from the kid's perspective and the father's perspective.
Thank you. From the father's perspective,
Yeah.
we want to be critical of men and say, how can they not know that? But that's terribly sad for men. So I remember distinctly the first time that I saw a baby changing table in a McDonald's restroom. I literally started crying because I had been changing my kids' diapers on nasty bathroom sinks because nobody thought that a man would be changing a diaper. So why would you put a diaper changing table in a men's room? Yeah. And I went into a McDonald's with my son and I saw the table and I thought, oh my God, maybe people are starting to have a little broader understanding of what a man, but there used to be a joke back then. What do you call a dad in the park with his kids on a Saturday?
What?
Divorced. Because you didn't used to see. So you're too young. You don't know this. But when I was raising my kids, I'd bring my kids to the park on Saturday. And there'd be like 2 divorced dads there and all women. Wow. Dads weren't involved in their kids' lives. And one generation later, I can't believe how involved my son is. My son is starting 8 weeks paternity leave next week. They're having another baby. He's going to stay home for 8 weeks with the baby.
So we're trending in the right direction for health.
I think so. If we don't, if it doesn't all go to serial killers and mass shootings, but yeah, we're both trending in the right direction and we're about to go off the cliff.
That's weird. Although, is it fear mongering? Well, no, I can't. I mean, the school shootings are not fear mongering. Yeah, I guess. Right. I don't know.
And if you look into who's doing those, not only men,
angry, isolated white kids.
Men. Yes, isolated is the key.
Man, and we know this, but we need to work on it. And working on it again isn't working on ourselves is seen as sort of feminine.
That's
at the gym or something, All right, I'm gonna wrap this up because I took your full hour. But let me ask you one more thing, since this seems to be a common theme on every episode that's come up so far. Where do you stand on psychedelic therapy?
I'm very excited about it. I think it has real potential. It's very clear to me that psychedelic drugs are like a direct line to the unconscious, that people get in touch with parts of themselves through psychedelic drugs that they don't normally. So I think psychedelic drugs are doing the same thing I do in my office, but they do it very powerfully and very quickly. Now, if you want to read more about this, I recommend the Castaneda books, Carlos Castaneda books. They're really very good. People for hundreds of years have had certain guidelines for using psychedelic drugs. They don't use them recreationally. You don't do it alone. You have a teacher. You do many, many months of preparation, but there are guardrails put in place. So, dropping acid with your friends at the concert is not the same as psychedelic drugs used in psychotherapy. They are dangerous in that setting. You need to be with somebody who really knows what they're doing. And then I think 20 years from now, it'll be common.
I hope so. I'm not into weed. I'm holding out for medicinal cocaine, but much in the way that like my small town has a dispensary. It's so commonplace now. And again, not my drug of choice, but I'm glad that it was finally decriminalized and destigmatized. And I hope the same thing happens with psychedelics, particularly mushrooms, which I feel are as innocuous as you're going to get in that realm.
Well, we don't criminalize drugs based on how dangerous they are. We criminalize them for political reasons,
which is so goddamn weird.
You know how many people are in prison serving 20, 30-year sentences for possession of marijuana? So imagine how they feel. Now we're decriminalizing it, but they still have to do the rest of their prison sentence.
Not only decriminalizing it, but it costs something like $110 a day to house an inmate. Once they get out, they're going to have a felony on their record, and then they're not going to be able to get a job. So they're going to go back to dealing, and now weed's legal, so they're going to deal something else. The recidivism rate is fucking outrageous. And not to mention, we're spending $100, $110 a day to keep them, and that's without any medical procedures or anything else. They could be in the workforce, making money and paying taxes. It's so fucking stupid.
Well, it's going to get a lot worse because the worse things get in the economy, the more people end up in prison. There are actually people who go to prison because they need health care that they can't afford. So they actually, in their minds, if they need like a surgery, they actually will commit a crime because the only way they can get the surgery is in prison.
Well, to be fair, it's not as if any other industrialized nation provides healthcare for its citizens. So it's not like we're doing anything different. You know, we're just going along with the rest of the world, the rest of the educated, industrialized world.
National Public Radio did a story on healthcare around the world, and they asked everybody around the world the same question. What happens in your country when people go bankrupt from health expenses? Yeah. And nobody understood the question. This is the only country in the world where people would understand what that question means, because it's the only country it happens.
This is how I don't think the average American doesn't understand how radically right-wing we are, because every country has ideological conservatives and ideological progressives. But the most ardent right-wing lunatic in Germany, say, is not storming the streets going, if I have a heart attack, I want to lose my house. So even they understand the benefit of socialized medicine. The most neo-Nazis are having a fucking meeting right now, and not one of them, is anti-socialized medicine, which should tell you how right we are and how the Stockholm syndrome we have
but again,
for our oligarchy.
If you read the history on how this happened, it's an historical accident. It's not like planners sat down and decided to do it this way. It was an historical accident that we ended up with the healthcare, and now we're attached to it, and we don't want to change it.
We spend the most amount of money, and we get some of the worst service. Our infant mortality is garbage. Our life expectancy is garbage, and we're paying, Lamborghini prices, and we got a bicycle.
And by the way, most countries' healthcare system includes payment for psychotherapy. It's another thing we're backwards on.
Which is ironic, because they always say, these school shootings, it's not about the guns, it's about the kids. We got to get them help. Well, great. Let's pay for their fucking therapy then. Oh, no, we can't do that. That's socialism, you communist piece of shit.
It's not what it is. It's just stupid economics, because you save, I think Head Start, every dollar spent on Head Start, I think saves $7 or something like that. So when you cut Head Start, you're paying 7 times the money you're saving. It doesn't make any sense. It just doesn't make fiscal sense.
We love downstream issues. If we could just fix the upstream shit, we'd be a lot better off. But what are you going to do? We're all dumb. The other thing, too, is Americans are fucking
all right,
not particularly intelligent. All right, hey, let's do me a favor. Let's log off the show and then stay for a second. Sure. Let's debrief and make sure I get that email, which I'll read while I'm drinking. Just kidding. All right, hey, listen, I'll be back tomorrow. Good night, America.